You know that feeling when something just isn't right? When your subconscious pulls you out of sleep because somewhere in the back of your mind alarm bells are ringing? 7 years. 7 peaceful years until that night. I woke up to a sound that didn't belong. A deep, rumbling diesel engine. Not one, but multiple engines idling somewhere way too close to my bedroom window. At first, I thought maybe it was a garbage truck running early, or maybe road construction starting at some ungodly hour. But as I lay there, fully awake now, the sound wasn't moving, it was stationary, and it was coming from my backyard. I got out of bed, careful not to wake my wife, Sarah, and made my way to the window. What I saw made absolutely no sense. There were lights on in my detached garage, bright fluorescent lights flooding out from under the doors and through the small side windows. My garage, my property, lit up like a Christmas tree at 3 in the morning. I threw on some clothes and headed outside. The October air was crisp, and my breath formed little clouds as I crossed my backyard. With each step, the diesel rumble got louder, and then I heard voices. Male voices, laughing and talking like they were at some kind of social gathering, in my garage, at 3 a.m. I reached the side door of the garage, and through the window I could see them. 4 men in security uniforms, the kind our HOA security team wears. And inside my garage, 3 white trucks, equipment scattered everywhere, and my workbench, the one I'd spent months organizing, completely taken over with laptops, papers, and what looked like some kind of command center setup. They were using my electricity, my space, my workshop, like they owned it. I tried the side door, locked from the inside. I banged on it hard. The conversation inside stopped immediately. I could see shadows moving, but nobody came to the door. "Open up!" I shouted. "This is my property!" Nothing. Just the sound of those diesel engines continuing to idle. I pulled out my phone and opened the app from my smart garage door system. I'd installed it 2 years ago, one of those fancy setups that lets you control everything remotely. I entered my access code. I tried again. Same result. Someone had changed my access codes to my own garage, on my own property. I was effectively locked out of my own building, while 4 strangers sat inside like they owned the place. That's when the side door finally opened, and out stepped a man I recognized, Ray Hoffman, captain of our HOA's security team. He was about 50, stocky, with that particular kind of arrogance that comes from wearing a uniform and thinking it gives you real authority. "Mr. Jackson," he said, not even having the decency to look embarrassed, "you need to go back inside your house." "I need to go back inside?" I repeated. "You're in my garage using my electricity, and you're telling me what to do?" Ray crossed his arms. "We have authorization to be here. Take it up with the HOA board during business hours." Authorization? To use my private property? That's not how property rights work. That's not how any of this works. But at 3:30 in the morning, arguing with a man who clearly wasn't going to budge, I made a decision. I'd go back inside, but not because he told me to, because I needed to figure out exactly what was going on. As I walked back to my house, something occurred to me, something I'd almost forgotten about. 3 years ago, after a series of break-ins in the neighborhood, I'd installed a small dash cam in the corner of my garage. Just a cheap model from Amazon, pointed at the garage doors to catch anyone trying to break in. I'd mounted it up near the ceiling, partially hidden behind a beam. After a few months with no incidents, I'd honestly forgotten it was even there. The SD card had probably looped over itself 100 times by now. But if that camera was still recording, I had evidence. And more importantly, I might be able to find out just how long this had been going on. I went straight to my home office and pulled up the cloud backup for the dash cam. Yes, I'd set it up to back up to the cloud. Paranoid? Maybe. But right now, that paranoia was about to pay off big time. The camera was still active, still recording, and the footage went back months. I started with tonight's footage, just to confirm what I'd seen. Sure enough, at 4:27 a.m., the pedestrian side door of my garage had opened. Ray Hoffman entered first, followed by 3 other security guards. Within 15 minutes, all 3 trucks had pulled in, and they'd set up shop like it was their personal office. But here's where it got interesting. I scrolled back through the footage. 1 week earlier, same thing. 2:30 a.m., they arrived, set up shop, left around 7 a.m. 2 weeks before that, same pattern. I kept scrolling. A month back, 2 months, 3 months. Ladies and gentlemen, these people had been using my garage as their personal headquarters since at least June. For 4 months, they'd been entering my property, using my electricity, my space, my tools, operating like they had every right to be there. And I'd had no idea. You know what the beautiful thing about modern technology is? Everything leaves a digital footprint. And these guys? They'd left a footprint the size of Bigfoot. But I needed to be smart about this. If I went to the HOA board without overwhelming evidence, they'd close ranks. They'd deny everything. It would be my word against theirs, and I'd be painted as the problem resident who was making trouble. No, I needed leverage, real leverage. And then it hit me. My garage door system, the one they'd locked me out of. It had a feature I'd never used, an emergency lockdown mode. Living in Florida, you don't mess around with hurricane prep. When I'd had the garage doors installed, the company had included this heavy-duty lockdown feature. At the press of a button, steel bolts would engage on all 3 vehicle bays, essentially sealing them shut from the outside. The bolts went into reinforced concrete. You'd need industrial cutting equipment to get through them. I'd never activated it, never needed to, until now. I pulled up the master control panel on my computer, the one that overrode all the individual access codes, and there it was, emergency lockdown mode. My finger hovered over the button. If I did this, those 3 trucks weren't going anywhere. All their equipment, their command center, everything trapped inside. The pedestrian side door didn't have the same lockdown feature, so the men themselves could leave whenever they wanted. I wasn't imprisoning anyone, I wasn't breaking any laws, but their illegal operation, that was about to be stuck in my garage for as long as I wanted. I clicked the button. Even from inside my house, I heard it, a series of heavy mechanical clunks as the steel bolts engaged. Through my window, I saw Ray Hoffman appear at the garage door, pushing against it, then pushing harder, then running to the other doors. All 3 bays sealed tight. I poured myself a cup of coffee and watched from my kitchen window as the 4 security guards tried everything. They pushed, they pulled. Ray was on his phone, his face getting redder than the minute. Finally, they all exited through the pedestrian side door and stood in my driveway, gesturing and arguing among themselves. One of them, a younger guy, maybe 30, started walking towards my house. I opened the front door before he could knock. "Your trucks will be returned when we've sorted out this trespassing situation," I said calmly. "Feel free to contact the HOA board, or better yet, the police. I'd be happy to explain to law enforcement why I've secured my own property against unauthorized access." The young guard opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. No words came out. "The pedestrian door is open. You're free to remove any personal belongings, wallets, phones, keys, but the trucks and any HOA equipment stay until this is resolved. Now, it's 4:30 in the morning and I'd like to get back to sleep. Please vacate my driveway." I closed the door. Through the window, I watched them make a few more calls, have a heated discussion, and then finally, they left, on foot. 3 white trucks locked in my garage. And me? I went back to bed with a smile on my face. This was just the beginning. Pretty well for the next few hours. When I woke up at 7:30 a.m., the first thing I did was check the security camera feed on my phone. No new activity at the garage. The trucks were still there, locked in tight. Sarah was already up making breakfast. I'd filled her in on everything when I'd come back to bed, and she'd been appropriately outraged. Sarah's a paralegal. She knows her way around legal issues, and her first advice had been simple: document everything and don't let them gaslight you. Smart woman. That's why I married her. By 8:15 a.m., I was on my second cup of coffee when I saw a black Escalade pull into my driveway.
out stepped Ray Hoffman and another woman I recognized immediately, Brenda Kessler, president of our HOA board. Brenda was exactly the kind of HOA president you'd expect from a stereotype. Mid-50s, always dressed like she was about to attend a country club luncheon with that particular haircut that demands to speak to the manager. She'd been president for 3 years, and in that time she'd made it her personal mission to make everyone's life just a little bit more miserable with endless rules about mailbox colors and approved lawn decorations. I opened the door before they could knock. "Mr. Jackson," Brenda began, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "we seem to have a little misunderstanding here." "No misunderstanding. Your security team was trespassing on my property. I secured my garage. Pretty straightforward." Ray stepped forward, trying to use his physical presence to intimidate. "You need to open those doors right now. That's HOA property in there." "HOA property in my garage, on my property?" I laughed. "That's a fascinating interpretation of property law." Brenda held up a hand, silencing Ray. She reached into her designer purse and pulled out a folder. "Actually, Mr. Jackson, we have authorization. You signed an agreement allowing the HOA security team access to your garage for operational purposes." She handed me a document. I took it, my heart rate picking up. Had I signed something years ago and forgotten about it? Some fine print in the HOA bylaws? The document was titled Security Access Agreement. It was dated March 15th, 2021, and there, at the bottom, was a signature that looked remarkably like mine. "I never signed this," I said immediately. "The signature says otherwise. Now please open the garage door so our security team can retrieve their vehicles and equipment." I stared at the signature. It did look like mine. Similar loops, similar pressure points. Someone had done a decent job copying it, but there was a problem. A big problem. March 15th, 2021. That date was burned into my memory for the worst possible reason. March 15th, 2021 was the day of my mother's funeral. She'd passed away unexpectedly from a heart attack on March 10th, and I'd flown out to San Diego the next day to be with my father and help with arrangements. I didn't return home until March 20th. On March 15th, 2021, I wasn't even in Florida. "I'll need to review this with my attorney," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "You'll hear from me soon, Mr. Jackson," then closed the door. The moment they left, I was on the phone with Sarah. "I need every piece of evidence that I was in San Diego on March 15th, 2021. "Your mother's funeral," Sarah said quietly. "I remember. I'll pull the flight records from our email. You also posted on Facebook that day. I'll screenshot it. And there were photos from the service." Within 30 minutes, I had a comprehensive alibi. Flight records showing I departed Tampa on March 11th and returned March 20th. Hotel reservation in San Diego from March 11th to March 20th. Facebook post from the funeral service on March 15th, timestamped and geotagged to San Diego. Photos from the funeral with EXIF data showing San Diego location. Credit card charges from San Diego restaurants and gas stations. Brenda Kessler had just handed me a forged document, and I had ironclad proof that it was forged. But here's the thing about playing chess. You don't reveal your winning move until the perfect moment. If I went to them immediately with proof that the signature was forged, they'd scramble. They'd come up with excuses. They'd claim it was an honest mistake. No. I needed to understand the full scope of what was going on. Why were they so desperate to use my garage? What were they really doing in there at 3 a.m.? I pulled up the dash cam footage again, but this time I wasn't just looking at when they arrived and left. I was looking at what they were actually doing, and what I found made forgery look like a parking ticket.
3 hours going through footage. Frame by frame, I watched the security team's activities inside my garage, and patterns started to emerge. They weren't just hanging out. This wasn't some lazy security guards looking for a climate-controlled place to nap on company time. They were working intensely. Each night they came, and I'd now confirmed it was happening 3 to 4 times per week. They followed the same routine.
They'd set up laptops on my workbench, they'd pull out folders and documents, and they'd spend hours entering data into spreadsheets. At first, I couldn't make out what they were typing. The camera angle was too far away and the resolution wasn't high enough to read computer screens. But then I remembered something. One of the security upgrades the HOA had implemented 6 months ago was license plate readers at both community entrances. They'd sold it to residents as a safety feature, automatically logging every vehicle that entered or exited the neighborhood. At the time, some residents had raised privacy concerns, but Brenda had assured everyone that the data was only for security purposes and would be securely stored and never shared. I had a sinking feeling I knew exactly where that data was going. I zoomed in on one section of footage from 2 weeks ago. One of the guards had stood up to stretch, and as he did, he'd moved away from the laptop, leaving the screen clearly visible for about 15 seconds. I could see a spreadsheet. Columns labeled name, address, vehicle make or model, license plate, entry times, exit times, frequency. They were compiling detailed surveillance data on every resident in our community. But why? What possible reason would the HOA have for creating such detailed profiles on residents? The license plate readers were supposed to be for security, checking for vehicles that didn't belong, maybe helping solve a crime if one occurred. This was something else entirely. I kept watching. Around hour 3 of one session, I saw Ray Hoffman hold up a document to show the others. The camera caught it perfectly. At the top of the page was a logo and company name, Data Harvest Marketing Solutions. I immediately opened my laptop and searched for the company. Their website was sleek and professional, offering a consumer behavior analytics and residential pattern data to businesses. In plain English, they collected information about people's daily habits and sold it to marketers. And suddenly, everything made sense. The HOA wasn't collecting this data for security purposes. They were collecting it to sell, to data brokers, to marketing companies. Think about it. They knew when every resident left for work and came home. They knew how many vehicles each household had. They could infer income levels from vehicle makes and models. They could establish patterns. Who goes to the gym every morning at 6 a.m.? Who comes home late every Friday night? Who has regular visitors? This wasn't security data. This was a goldmine for marketers, insurance companies, and who knows who else. And they'd been doing it under the guise of neighborhood safety. I needed to find the connection between Brenda Kessler and Data Harvest Marketing Solutions. There had to be one. People don't just randomly decide to set up an elaborate data mining scheme for fun. So I started with the obvious. I searched for Brenda's name alongside the company. Nothing came up in regular searches. Then I tried social media. I went to Brenda's Facebook page, which was public because, of course it was, and started looking through her friends list and family connections. It took about 20 minutes, but then I found it. Kevin Marsh, listed as Brenda's brother-in-law, and according to his LinkedIn profile, CEO and founder of Data Harvest Marketing Solutions. There it was. The HOA president's brother-in-law ran a data brokerage firm, and the HOA was feeding him detailed surveillance data on 247 households in our community. I'd bet my house residents had no idea their daily patterns were being sold to third parties. I'd also bet that none of this was disclosed in any HOA documentation. But I needed more than circumstantial evidence. I needed proof of the business arrangement. I needed to connect the dots in a way that would stand up to scrutiny. And I had an idea of exactly how to get it. But first, I needed to talk to someone who understood both the legal implications and the technical aspects of what I'd discovered. Time to call in a professional. My house 7 years ago. She was sharp, thorough, and had a reputation for not backing down from HOA disputes. I'd stayed in touch with her over the years, and she'd helped me navigate a few minor HOA issues, nothing major, just the usual petty nonsense about fence heights and approved paint colors. But this was something else entirely. I called her office at 9 a.m. and got an appointment for 2 p.m. that same day. When I walked into her office in downtown Tampa, I was carrying a laptop with all the dashcam footage, the forged authorization document, and a file folder thick with printed evidence. Diana took one look at my face and said, "This is more serious than a fence dispute, isn't it?" I spent the next hour walking her through everything: the 3 a.m. discovery, the locked trucks, the forged signature, the data mining scheme, the connection to Kevin Marsh. Diana listened without interrupting, taking notes on her legal pad. When I finished, she sat back in her chair and let out a low whistle. "Scott, what you're describing is potentially criminal activity on multiple fronts," she said. "Let's break this down. First, the trespassing and unauthorized use of your property. That's straightforward. They had no legal right to access your garage." "Even with their authorization document?" I asked. "That document is worthless," Diana said. "First, you have absolute proof you didn't sign it, which makes it forgery. But even if you had signed it, there are problems. Your property deed doesn't show any recorded easements giving the HOA access to your garage, and HOA bylaws can't override your property rights without your explicit consent and proper legal documentation." She pulled out my original property deed from her files. "See here? No easements, no special provisions. Your garage is your private property, full stop. The HOA has no more right to use it than they do to use your living room." That was good to hear, but I knew the property dispute was just the beginning. "Now, the forgery," Diana continued. "That's a third-degree felony in Florida. If they created this document specifically to justify their illegal access to your property, that's not just forgery, that's fraud. And if the HOA board approved this arrangement with Brenda's brother-in-law without disclosure, that's a conflict of interest violation." "What's our move?" I asked. Diana thought for a moment. "We need to be strategic. If you go public immediately, they'll destroy evidence. If you go to the police immediately, they might claim it's a civil matter. What we need is more direct evidence of the business arrangement between the HOA and Data Harvest Marketing Solutions." "Like what?" "A contract, financial records showing payments, communications between Brenda and her brother-in-law discussing the arrangement. Anything that proves this wasn't just Brenda doing a favor for family, but actual scheme to profit from resident data." I thought about the folder I'd seen in the dashcam footage, the one with the Data Harvest logo. "What if I could get them to incriminate themselves?" I asked. "What if I could get them to admit what they're doing on recording?" Diana leaned forward. "Florida is a two-party consent state for recordings. You can't secretly record a conversation. But what if they knew I was recording? What if I told them up front?" "Then it's legal," Diana said. "But why would they talk to you if they know you're recording?" I smiled. "Because I'm going to offer them something they want very badly." "What's that?" "Access to their trucks and my silence."
Drafted a carefully worded email to Brenda Kessler. "Miss Kessler, I've had time to review the authorization document you provided. I have concerns about its authenticity and the scope of activities being conducted on my property. I'm willing to discuss a resolution that would allow the HOA to retrieve its vehicles and equipment. However, I need a full understanding of what operations were being conducted in my garage and why. I'm available to meet tomorrow at a time of your convenience. Scott Jackson." I sent it at 7:32 p.m. By 7:45 p.m., my phone rang. Unknown number. "Mr. Jackson, this is Kevin Marsh. Brenda gave me your contact information." Interesting. Not Brenda calling herself, but her brother-in-law, the CEO of Data Harvest Marketing Solutions. "Mr. Marsh," I said neutrally. "Listen, I think we may have gotten off on the wrong foot here. Brenda tells me there's been some confusion about the garage situation. I'd like to clear that up." "I'm listening." "How about we meet in person? Tomorrow, say 10 a.m. There's a Starbucks on Dale Mabry. We can talk through this like reasonable people." "Mr. Marsh, I'm happy to meet, but I want to be completely transparent with you. I'll be recording our conversation.
I'm not trying to trap anyone, but given the current situation, I want everything documented." There was a pause. "You're going to record me?" "I'm required by Florida law to inform you. You're free to decline the meeting, but yes, if we meet, I'll be recording." Another pause, longer this time. I could almost hear him thinking, weighing his options. Finally, "Okay, that's fine. 10 a.m., Starbucks on Dale Mabry." "I'll be there," I said, and hung up. He'd agreed, which meant he either thought he could talk his way out of this, or he was desperate enough to take the risk. Either way, I'd have him on recording. This spent the rest of the evening preparing. I reviewed all the evidence again, making sure I understood every detail. I charged my phone fully, I'd be using its recording app, and I rehearsed the conversation in my head, anticipating what he might say, how I'd respond. Sarah watched me pace the kitchen. "You sure about this?" she asked. "I think if he's willing to meet knowing I'm recording, he's either going to try to intimidate me or buy me off. Either way, I get evidence." "Or he's planning something else," Sarah said quietly. That thought had occurred to me too, but what were my options? Hide in my house forever? Let them get away with forgery and privacy violations? No, it was time to confront this head-on. The next morning, I arrived at the Starbucks 15 minutes early and chose a table in the back corner. Quiet, but public. Visible to staff and customers, but far enough away that our conversation wouldn't be overheard. At exactly 10 a.m., Kevin Marsh walked in. He was younger than I expected, probably 42, 43, well-dressed in business casual attire, with the kind of confident walk that came from years of successful deal-making. He spotted me, bought himself a coffee, and sat down across from me. "Mr. Jackson," he said. I shook his hand, then placed my phone on the table between us, recording app clearly visible. "As I mentioned, I'm recording this conversation." Kevin glanced at the phone and nodded. "Fair enough. Look, Scott, can I call you Scott? I think there's been some misunderstanding here. Brenda tells me there's been some confusion about the garage situation. I'd like to clear that up." "I'm listening." "How about we clear things up in person? Tomorrow, say 10 a.m. There's a Starbucks on Dale Mabry. We can talk through this like reasonable people." In the next few moments, I knew exactly what he was trying to do. I agreed, but by setting him down, first announcing I was recording him, he was flustered. His demeanor changed from confident to defensive. He admitted he was confused about forgery happening in volunteer organizations. He started to bend his truth and elements of his story. Now, Mr. Marsh sat back in his seat. Coffee in hand, he'd say, "I know something happened, but I don't know what was what." I was able to pinpoint him and really make him give up. And finally, after many months of living in this fight-or-flight state, I knew I could see the light at the end of the tunnel. And the next day, when the sheriff saw the recording, he knew exactly what the next steps were.
Pen and looked at me with what I'm sure he thought was a friendly smile. "Scott, you've been inconvenienced. The HOA should have communicated better about their space needs. So here's what I'm proposing. A payment of $50,000 as compensation for the use of your garage over the past months, plus an ongoing monthly payment of $2,000 for continued access." He started writing a check, $50,000, made out to me personally. "All you need to do is sign a brief agreement acknowledging that you authorized the garage use, open the doors so the security team can retrieve their equipment, and delete any recordings you may have made." I looked at the check but didn't reach for it. "That's generous," I said carefully. "But I'm curious, why is this coming from you personally and not the HOA?" Kevin shifted again. "I'm helping Brenda out. She's family. The HOA has budget constraints, and this situation needs to be resolved quickly. Consider it a personal gesture of goodwill." $50,000 is a substantial personal gesture. I'm a successful businessman, Scott, and I believe in solving problems efficiently. This solves the problem. "What exactly were the security operations doing in my garage? Just storing equipment?" Kevin's smile tightened just a fraction. "Data entry, administrative work, shift reports, the usual operational necessities."
Data entry for what specifically? Security logs, license plates, vehicle tracking, standard stuff for a gated community. I nodded slowly. And this data, where does it go after it's entered? Kevin's eyes narrowed slightly. He was starting to realize I knew more than I was letting on. It's stored in the HOA security database, for reference if there's ever an incident. It's not shared with any third parties? Why would it be? Kevin said, his tone sharpening. Look, Scott, I'm trying to be reasonable here. I'm offering you a substantial amount of money to resolve what amounts to a minor administrative issue. Take the check, sign the agreement, and we all move on with our lives. What's your company's involvement in this? I asked directly. Kevin's jaw tightened. I don't have any company involvement. This is personal. Data Harvest Marketing Solutions. That's your company, correct? He froze for just a moment. How do you... He caught himself. Yes, that's my company, but it has nothing to do with this. So your company doesn't have any relationship with the HOA, doesn't receive any data from the HOA security systems? Kevin stood up abruptly. This conversation is over. You clearly have no interest in a reasonable resolution. Actually, I'm very interested. I'm just trying to understand what I'd be agreeing to. You're asking me to sign a document stating I authorize access to my garage when we both know I didn't. You're asking me to delete evidence of what your security team was really doing in there. And you're offering me $50,000 to do it. Kevin leaned down, his voice dropping. Listen carefully. You're out of your depth here. There are business arrangements in place that are way above your pay grade. Smart people know when to take a generous offer and walk away. Is that a threat? It's advice. Friendly advice. He tapped the check still sitting on the table. This offer expires today. After that, things get complicated for you. HOA violations, legal fees, your life becomes very difficult. Mr. Marsh, you just offered me $50,000 to falsify a document and destroy evidence while being recorded. I think your life is about to become more complicated than mine. Kevin's face went pale. For a moment, he'd forgotten about the phone recording the entire conversation. I stopped the recording and sent a copy immediately to Diana Reyes. Within 30 seconds, she replied, "This is gold. Call me."
Held in the community clubhouse, a large room with folding chairs set up auditorium style. These meetings typically drew maybe 30 residents on a good night. Most people couldn't be bothered to attend unless there was a controversial issue on the agenda. Tonight, as I arrived at 6:45 p.m., 15 minutes before the scheduled start, there were already 70 people in the room. Word had gotten out. I wasn't sure how, but the residents knew something was happening. Maybe it was Brenda's suspicious cancellation of the open forum. Maybe it was neighborhood gossip about the trucks locked in my garage. Either way, people had showed up. Diana arrived moments after me, carrying a leather briefcase and looking every bit the attorney. We took seats in the third row, right center, visible but not confrontational. At 7 p.m. sharp, the HOA board filed in and took their seats at the front table. Brenda Kessler in the center as president. To her right, Marcus Chen, the vice president, a retired engineer who mostly stayed quiet and let Brenda run things. To her left, Patricia Holbrook, the secretary, a woman in her 60s who seemed to genuinely try to do right by the community, but was frequently steamrolled by Brenda. At the far ends sat the two board members at large, both of whom I'd rarely heard speak at meetings. Brenda's eyes found me immediately. For just a moment, her composed expression faltered. Then she saw Diana, and I watched her jaw tighten. She knew. She knew exactly what was coming. "Good evening, everyone," Brenda began, tapping her gavel. "Thank you all for attending tonight's quarterly meeting. We have a full agenda, so let's get started." She rushed through the typical opening items: approval of previous meeting minutes, financial report, community maintenance updates. Everything was moving at double speed, and I realized her strategy.
If she could get through the agenda quickly enough and adjourn the meeting before anyone objected, she could avoid the open forum entirely. "And with that," Brenda said, after barely 20 minutes, "I believe we've covered all scheduled agenda items. Motion to adjourn?" "Wait," I said, standing up. The room went quiet. All eyes turned to me. "Point of order," I continued. "According to HOA bylaws, Section 4.2, the open forum is a mandatory component of all quarterly meetings. It hasn't been conducted yet." Brenda's smile was forced. "As noted in yesterday's email, we're postponing the open forum to next quarter due to time constraints." "The bylaws don't include provisions for postponing mandatory meeting components," I said. Diana had prepped me perfectly. "I move that we proceed with the mandatory open forum as outlined in Section 4.2 of the HOA bylaws." Murmurs spread through the crowd. Several residents nodded in agreement. Marcus Chen leaned over and whispered something to Brenda. She listened, her expression darkening. "Mr. Jackson, the board has the authority to set meeting agendas." I interrupted. "I'd like to call for a vote. All residents in favor of proceeding with the mandatory open forum as outlined in Section 4.2 of the HOA bylaws, please raise your hand." I raised mine. Sarah raised hers. Diana, as a non-resident, couldn't vote, but she didn't need to. Hands shot up all around the room. I did a quick count, at least 50 residents, probably more, far more than the majority needed. All opposed? 4 hands, board members and their spouses. "The vote is clear," I said. "The open forum will proceed, and I'd like to be the first to speak." Brenda looked like she wanted to argue, but Marcus whispered to her again. Finally, she nodded stiffly. "Very well, the open forum is now open. Mr. Jackson, you have 5 minutes. Section 4.2 specifies that open forum speakers have 10 minutes, I corrected. I'll use my full allotted time. I walked to the front of the room. Sarah helped me connect my laptop to the projection screen that the board had been using for their financial reports. 70-plus residents watched me in silence. "Good evening, everyone. My name is Scott Jackson. I live at 2247 Meadowbrook Lane, and I've been a resident here for 7 years. Tonight, I'm going to present evidence of criminal activity conducted by our HOA board. What I'm about to show you is documented, verified, and legally actionable." The room was absolutely silent. I clicked to the first slide, a photo of my garage with 3 white trucks visible inside. 6 days ago, I discovered that HOA security personnel had been illegally using my private garage as an operations center for at least 4 months. They did so without my knowledge or consent, using forged authorization documents to justify their actions. Brenda stood up. "This is inappropriate." "Sit down, Miss Kessler," Diana said from her seat, her voice cutting through the room. "Mr. Jackson has the floor. As an attorney, I'm advising you that any attempt to silence him will be noted." Brenda sat down.
Clicked to the next slide, the dash cam footage timestamped at 2:47 a.m. This is security camera footage from inside my garage on the night of October 23rd. As you can see, 4 HOA security personnel entering my property in the middle of the night. Watch what they do next. I played the video clip. The room watched in silence as the guards set up their command center, brought in the 3 trucks, and began their data entry work. This wasn't a one-time occurrence, I continued, clicking to a timeline slide. This footage shows entries on October 23rd, October 16th, October 9th, September 27th, September 18th. The timeline went back months. At least 48 separate instances of unauthorized access to my private property. When I confronted the HOA board about this trespassing, I was presented with this document. I displayed the forged authorization agreement. An authorization form supposedly signed by me on March 15, 2021, giving the HOA permission to use my garage. There's just one problem with that. Next slide, my flight itinerary. On March 15, 2021, I was in San Diego, California, attending my mother's funeral. I have flight records, hotel reservations, credit card statements, and geotagged photos proving I was 2,500 miles away when I supposedly signed this document in Florida. Gasps spread through the crowd. Several residents were turning to look at Brenda, whose face had gone pale. So we have trespassing and we have forgery. But why? Why would the HOA go to such lengths to access my garage specifically? The answer lies in what they were actually doing in there. I played another clip from the dashcam footage, zoomed in on the laptop screen showing the detailed resident database. They were compiling surveillance data on every resident in this community: names, addresses, vehicle information, license plate numbers, and detailed logs of when we come and go. Every time you drive through those entrance gates, the license plate readers capture your information. But instead of using that data for security purposes as promised, it was being entered into these databases. Next slide, the Data Harvest Marketing Solutions logo from the folder in the footage. This is Data Harvest Marketing Solutions, a data brokerage company that collects consumer behavior information and sells it to marketers, insurance companies, and other third parties. And this is Kevin Marsh. Photo of Kevin Marsh with his LinkedIn title. Kevin Marsh is the CEO of Data Harvest Marketing Solutions. He's also Brenda Kessler's brother-in-law. Your HOA president has been feeding your personal data to her family member's company, likely for profit, without your knowledge or consent. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder. Several residents were now on their feet, looking between me and Brenda with expressions of shock and anger. When I confronted this scheme, Kevin Marsh contacted me personally and requested a meeting. I agreed with one condition, that I would record our conversation. He agreed to be recorded. I clicked play on the audio file. Kevin's voice filled the room. A payment of $50,000 as compensation for the use of your garage over the past months, plus an ongoing monthly payment of $2,000 for continued access. All you need to do is sign a brief agreement acknowledging that you authorized the garage use, open the doors so the security team can retrieve their equipment, and delete any recordings you may have made. Then my voice. So you're asking me to falsify documents and destroy evidence? Kevin's response. I'm offering you a substantial amount of money to resolve what amounts to a minor administrative issue. I stopped the audio and faced the room. This isn't about a garage. This isn't even about me. This is about an HOA board that has violated your trust, violated your privacy, and potentially broken multiple laws. They've been selling your personal information without your knowledge. They've forged documents. They've attempted to bribe a resident to cover up their crimes. I pulled out a stack of papers. I have here a formal complaint I will be filing with the police immediately following this meeting. I also have a civil lawsuit prepared. But before I do that, I wanted you, the residents of this community, to know the truth, because ultimately this is your community, and you deserve to know what's been done in your name. I looked directly at Brenda Kessler. Miss Kessler, I am formally requesting your immediate resignation as HOA president. I'm also requesting the resignation of any board member who was aware or participated in this scheme. If you don't resign tonight, I will proceed with all legal action available to me, and I will ensure every resident in this community knows exactly what you've done. The room erupted. Residents were shouting questions, demands for answers. Several people were filming on their phones. The controlled, orderly HOA meeting had descended into chaos, and in the back of the room, I saw two uniformed police officers entering through the door. Diana had called them, just as we'd planned.
The two officers, a male officer in his 30s and a female officer who appeared to be the senior partner, made their way through the crowded room. The residents parted to let them through, conversation dropping to hushed whispers. The female officer approached the board table. I'm Officer Martinez. This is Officer Kendrick. We're responding to a call about allegations of forgery and fraud. We need to speak with Brenda Kessler. Brenda stood up slowly, her face ashen. Officers, this is all a misunderstanding. This resident has some misguided... Ma'am, I'd advise you not to speak until we've had a chance to review the evidence, Officer Martinez said firmly. She turned to me. Are you Scott Jackson?
I am, I said. My attorney, Deanna Reyes, contacted your department earlier today to provide advance notice of the evidence we'd be presenting tonight. Deanna stood and handed Officer Martinez a folder. This contains copies of everything that was just presented: security camera footage, the forged authorization document, proof of Mr. Jackson's alibi on the date in question, evidence of the data collection scheme, and a recording of an attempted bribe by Mr. Kevin Marsh, who is complicit in this operation. Officer Martinez flipped through the folder, her expression growing more serious with each page. She looked at her partner, who nodded. Ms. Kessler, we need you to come with us to the station to answer some questions. This is ridiculous. Brenda's voice rose to a near shriek. You can't arrest me for an administrative dispute. We're not arresting you at this time. We're asking you to come to the station voluntarily to discuss these allegations. However, based on the evidence we've been provided, we will be conducting a formal investigation. I'm not going anywhere without my lawyer. That's your right, Officer Martinez said calmly. But you should know that we've also issued a request to speak with Mr. Kevin Marsh and Mr. Ray Hoffman. This investigation is happening whether you cooperate or not. Brenda looked around the room desperately, as if searching for support. She found none. Every resident was staring at her with expressions ranging from anger to disgust. I resign. The voice came from the board table. Patricia Holbrook, the secretary, had stood up. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was clear. I resign from the HOA board effective immediately. She repeated. I was not aware of the data collection arrangement or the use of Mr. Jackson's garage. I've served this community for 6 years in good faith, and I will not be associated with this corruption for one more minute. She grabbed her purse and walked out of the meeting, leaving her seat empty. That seemed to break the dam. Marcus Chen stood up next. I also resign. I had concerns about some of Brenda's decisions, but I didn't realize the extent. He trailed off, shaking his head. I'm sorry. I should have asked more questions. I resign. The two at-large board members looked at each other, then at the angry crowd of residents, then at the police officers. We resign, they said in unison. In less than 5 minutes, the entire HOA board had collapsed. Every member except Brenda had resigned, and Brenda was about to be escorted to the police station. Ms. Kessler? Officer Martinez prompted. Brenda grabbed her own purse with shaking hands. Fine, I'll come to the station, but you're all making a huge mistake. My lawyer is going to tear this apart, and when he does, I'm suing everyone involved for defamation. That's your prerogative, Deanna said coolly. We look forward to defending those claims in court, where all of this evidence will become part of the public record. Officer Martinez escorted Brenda towards the exit. As they passed me, Brenda stopped and looked me in the eye. You've destroyed this community. Everything I built, everything I did for these people. I didn't do anything for this community. I did it to them. Brenda's face twisted with rage, but Officer Martinez gently took her arm and led her away. The clubhouse door closed behind them, and for a moment the room was utterly silent. Then someone started clapping, slowly at first, then others joined in. Within seconds, the entire room was applauding. I held up my hands. Please, I don't need applause. I just need everyone to understand what happened here and why it matters. Your privacy was violated, your trust was betrayed, and it's going to take time to rebuild what was broken. A woman in the front row raised her hand. What happens now? We don't have a board. How does the HOA even function? Deanna stepped forward. According to your bylaws, when the entire board vacates, an emergency election must be held within 30 days. In the interim, the community can appoint an oversight committee to handle essential functions. I nominate Bradley Allen, someone called out. All eyes turned to an older man in the back, Bradley Allen, the retired police officer I'd mentioned earlier. He'd been watching everything with a careful, analytical eye.
I'm honored by the nomination, but folks, I need to be honest with you.
I'm 72 years old, and I retired from law enforcement to enjoy my golden years, not to manage an HOA." Gentle laughter rippled through the room. "That said," Bradley continued, "I can serve as interim president until we hold proper elections, but I'm only doing this if we agree on some fundamental changes. First, complete transparency. All board meetings recorded and posted online. All financial records available for resident review, and absolutely no more backroom deals or conflicts of interest." Applause broke out again. "All in favor of appointing Bradley Allen as interim HOA president?" Diana called out. The vote was unanimous. Over the next hour, the residents self-organized into committees. A financial review team volunteered to audit the HOA's books, looking for any payments made to Data Harvest Marketing Solutions or other questionable expenses. A legal committee formed to review all HOA contracts and agreements, and a bylaws committee began discussing amendments to prevent this kind of abuse from ever happening again. I sat with Diana, answering questions from residents who wanted to know more details. Several people thanked me for bringing this to light. A few others asked if their personal data could be recovered or deleted from wherever it had been sold. "That's going to be the hard part," Diana admitted. "Once data enters the commercial market, it's nearly impossible to fully retract. But we can pursue legal action against Data Harvest Marketing Solutions and any companies that purchased the data, arguing it was obtained illegally." Over the following week, the investigation moved quickly. The police obtained search warrants for the HOA's security files, Data Harvest Marketing Solutions offices, and Kevin Marsh's business records. What they found was even worse than I'd suspected. The data collection scheme had been operating for over 2 years, not just 4 months. The estimated value of data sold? Over $400,000. And it wasn't just our community. Kevin and Brenda had replicated the scheme in 3 other HOA communities in the Tampa area using similar tactics. Ray Hoffman, the security captain, cooperated fully with investigators in exchange for a reduced sentence. He provided emails, text messages, and financial records showing the paper trail between Brenda, Kevin, and the various data brokers. 3 weeks after that community meeting, formal charges were filed. Brenda Kessler was charged with forgery, third-degree felony, criminal trespass, fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, violations of Florida's data privacy statutes. Kevin Marsh was charged with conspiracy to commit fraud, bribery, wire fraud for the interstate sale of illegally obtained data, and violations of federal data protection laws. Ray Hoffman pled guilty to criminal trespass and testified against the others in exchange for probation and community service. Brenda's attorney negotiated a plea deal. She would plead guilty to forgery and fraud charges, serve 3 years of probation, pay $175,000 in restitution to the HOA and affected residents, and accept a permanent ban from holding any position in any HOA in the state of Florida. Kevin Marsh went to trial and was convicted on all counts. He received a 2-year prison sentence and was ordered to pay $650,000 in restitution and fines. Data Harvest Marketing Solutions was dissolved, and civil lawsuits were filed against every company that had purchased the illegally obtained data. The 3 other HOA communities where similar schemes had been operating filed their own criminal complaints, resulting in additional charges. As for me, I finally opened my garage doors for 21 days. The 3 white trucks were retrieved by a legitimate security company that the new board had hired, a company with actual contracts, proper insurance, and 0 interest in data mining schemes. I had the locks changed. I upgraded my security cameras, and I disconnected the remote access features on my garage door system. From now on, I'd be controlling it manually, thank you very much. The HOA reimbursed me for all electricity costs, the damage to my property, and my legal fees.
They also passed a resolution formally apologizing to all residents for the breach of privacy and establishing new oversight procedures to prevent future board corruption. The emergency election happened 6 weeks after the quarterly meeting. Bradley Allen ran unopposed for president. 3 new board members were elected, all of them residents who'd been vocal about transparency and accountability during the scandal. The new board's first act was to dismantle the license plate reader system entirely. Some residents had argued for keeping it with better oversight, but the majority voted to remove it completely. As one resident put it, "We're a neighborhood, not a surveillance state." The second act was to establish an independent audit committee with the power to review any HOA expenditure over $500 and to access all financial records without board approval. The third act was to name the new community center, currently under construction, the Patricia Holbrook Center, after the board secretary who'd been the first to resign when the corruption was exposed.
10 a.m. that Tuesday morning, I never imagined it would lead to all of this. I thought I'd confront some security guards goofing off on the job, maybe file a complaint with the HOA. Maybe switch to a community without such aggressive oversight. I didn't expect to uncover a criminal conspiracy. I didn't expect to bring down an entire HOA board. And I certainly didn't expect to end up testifying in federal court about data privacy violations. But here's what I learned through this entire ordeal. Corruption thrives in silence. It thrives when people don't ask questions, don't demand accountability, don't pay attention to what their elected representatives are doing. How many residents in my community drove past those HOA security trucks every day and never questioned where they went at night? How many people got the notice about license plate readers and thought, well, if it makes us safer, I'm okay with it, without asking what would happen to that data? I'm not blaming them. We all have busy lives. We trust that the people we elect to manage our communities have our best interests at heart. We trust that there are safeguards in place. But trust without verification is just faith, and faith in institutions that have no accountability is dangerous. If you live in an HOA community or any community with organized governance, here's my advice. Go to the meetings, even the boring ones, especially about 8 months after that explosive quarterly meeting. Patricia Holbrook, the secretary who resigned first, has become something of a community hero. The Patricia Holbrook Community Center opened in May, and she was there for the ribbon cutting, visibly emotional. She declined to run for the board again. She said she'd served her time and wanted to enjoy retirement. But she volunteers at the community garden and organizes the monthly neighborhood potlucks. Marcus Chen, the former vice president, actually apologized to me personally about 3 months after everything went down. He admitted he'd suspected something wasn't right but hadn't wanted to rock the boat. We're not friends exactly, but there's a mutual respect there now. He's on the new audit committee as a volunteer. Ray Hoffman completed his community service, 600 hours working with a nonprofit that helps homeless veterans. According to my retired cop neighbor, Bradley, Ray has actually stayed involved with the organization beyond his required hours. People can surprise you sometimes. He's banned from security work for 5 years as part of his plea deal, and he's apparently working in construction now. Kevin Marsh is serving his 2-year sentence at a federal minimum security facility. His wife divorced him about 4 months into his sentence. Data Harvest Marketing Solutions is completely defunct, and 3 of his former employees are cooperating with ongoing investigations into the data broker industry. Turns out Kevin's operation was small potatoes compared to some of the bigger players, and federal regulators are now taking a much harder look at the entire industry. As for Brenda Kessler, she's living in Orlando now, about 90 miles away. She sold her house in our community and moved within 2 months of accepting the plea deal. She's working as an administrative assistant at a medical office, and according to the terms of her probation, she has to notify any future employers about her fraud conviction. I saw her once, actually. I was in Orlando visiting Sarah's sister, and we stopped at a Publix grocery store. Brenda was in the checkout line ahead of us. She saw me, and for a moment our eyes met. She looked older, tired,
smaller somehow. She turned away without saying anything and left the store quickly. I don't know what I felt. Not satisfaction, exactly. Not pity, either. Just the kind of sadness for what she'd thrown away. She'd been HOA president for 3 years. She could have made a real positive difference in the community. Instead, she chose greed and corruption, and now she'll carry that conviction for the rest of her life. The new HOA board has been transforming the community in really positive ways. Without the money being siphoned off to data brokers, they actually have a budget surplus for the first time in years. They've used that surplus to completely renovate the playground with modern, safe equipment, install actual security cameras with proper disclosure and resident approval at the entrances, monitored by a legitimate security company with strict data protection policies, upgrade the community pool filtration system, create a community emergency fund for residents facing financial hardship, establish a scholarship program for residents' children attending college. These were all things residents had been requesting for years that Brenda's board had always claimed weren't in the budget. Funny how the budget worked out once people weren't stealing from it. As for Sarah and me, life has returned to a comfortable normal, though we're definitely more engaged with our community now. We host a monthly Know Your Neighbor coffee morning that's become surprisingly popular. 20 to 30 people show up, which for a Tuesday morning gathering is pretty impressive. Sarah got promoted at her paralegal firm, partly because the experience with my case reinvigorated her passion for the law. She's specializing in property rights and HOA disputes now. Turns out there's huge demand for attorneys who understand the complexities of community association law. My garage is exactly that, my garage. I use it to work on projects, store my tools, and park my car. Revolutionary, I know. But here's what I'm most proud of. This story has had ripples beyond just our community. Diana Reyes has used our case as a template for representing other homeowners in HOA disputes across Florida. 3 other attorneys have contacted her asking to collaborate. The Florida legislature is actually considering a bill, tentatively called the HOA Transparency and Data Protection Act, that would require all HOAs to disclose any data collection practices in writing to all residents, obtain explicit consent before sharing resident data with third parties, conduct annual independent audits of HOA finances, establish criminal penalties for HOA officers who forge documents or engage in self-dealing. Will it pass? I don't know. Politics is complicated, and there are powerful lobby groups that represent HOA management companies who aren't thrilled about additional oversight. But the fact that it's being discussed at all means something. I started this story by telling you about waking up at 3:17 a.m. to the sound of diesel engines in my backyard. It seemed like a nightmare at the time, a violation of my space, my privacy, my rights. But sometimes nightmares wake us up to realities we've been ignoring. Sometimes they force us to confront things we've been too comfortable, too trusting, too passive to question. 3 trucks locked in my garage became a symbol of resistance, of accountability, of ordinary people refusing to accept corruption just because it comes with official letterhead. You don't have to be a lawyer or an investigator or someone with special skills to stand up for your rights. You just have to be willing to ask questions, demand answers, and refuse to be silenced when you know something is wrong. That 3 a.m. wake-up call changed my life. It exposed a criminal conspiracy, brought justice to dozens of families, and transformed an entire community. And it started with one simple decision: to not accept what I was told, to investigate what I suspected, and to fight for what was right. Whatever challenges you're facing in your community, your workplace, your life, remember that. Remember that change starts with someone willing to say, "This isn't right, and I'm going to do something about it." Maybe that someone is you. Thank you for watching. If this story resonated with you, please share it. And if you're dealing with HOA issues or similar situations in your own community, know that you're not alone and you're not powerless. Stay vigilant, stay engaged, and never let anyone tell you that protecting your rights makes you the problem. This is Scott Jackson, signing off.